Okay, so I'd like to give a sort of framework for um, interacting with or understanding ideologies or religions or philosophies. All three of those categories of things are very similar in a lot of their dynamics. And so I want to present essentially a model to help um, like unionize or see them like side by side in a way. And I think it might be helpful for some people. Um, so I just get right into it. So in I'm going to use some big terms, but I'll try to just describe them as as easily as possible um, in layman terms if I can. So essentially, like in philosophy, you have let's just say within philosophy. And philosophy, by the way, if you're not familiar, is the study or the love of wisdom. Love, Philo, and Sophie. I guess that means wisdom. Um, so love of wisdom. So like that's what philosophy is. Love of wisdom. Just go ahead and put that right there. Okay, so that's our definition that we're working with for philosophy. Now, traditionally, like that's what philosophy meant, and over the course of let's say 2,600 years, that term has changed because it's carried by different cultures now. So it's no longer carried by the ancient Greek culture because they're not here anymore. So we've adopted the word and we've kind of changed its meaning and kind of reinterpreted for a time. And so philosophy is typically associated with the academy and universities, and it's like a discipline, a domain of study, and it has to do with I'm not sure, I guess it has to do with like maybe studying like I don't know, actually I don't really know what philosophy really is when you think about it. Like nothing's really coming to mind, but I'm going to give my best definition how I see it, and maybe that'll be helpful. So okay, so philosophy is like one thing people use philosophy for is they try to argue about what exists, and like that's called ontology. So ontology tries to answer questions like, what is it? What is its nature? Like, does it exist? If it exists, what kind of existence does the thing have? So, for example, the category of chairs exist is a concept in our mind, and then like there's a chair that this board is sitting on, and that exists like as a physical object. So the physical object has a different type of ontological nature than the concept of chairs in my mind. Like I can't point to the concept of chairs; it's only in my mind. But a chair I can point to, like it's like right there. There's the chair. So okay, so we have a chair and we have the concept of chairs. So one exists in the mind and one exists here. So let's keep that distinction, so that distinction is important. So I'm just going to categorize that distinction under the word nature. And I'll zoom this in later on so you can see better, but let's just get it on the board here now. So ontology has to do with the nature of the thing, the nature of existence in a nutshell, okay? And then in philosophy, there is other things, other sort of branches of philosophy. Another one is phenomenology. Let me put that up there, okay? And I'm going to put a little dividing line right here, a dividing line right here. So phenomenology is, phenomenology was I don't know when it started, but I think it had a lot to do with Edward Husserl in the 19th century, and the idea of phenomenology is something like looking at the world as it appears to us. So we're not trying to put statements on the world, like interpreting it. We just want to see it as it is. So, for example, if you were to look at, something like morality in humans, you could say there's a phenomenological element of morality in humans, meaning that we observe patterns of behavior that are, accepted or rejected in any certain culture. And different cultures have different norms for what's accepted and what's not. And so, but the general pattern of a morality is a phenomenon, if that makes sense. Like, it's universal, we see it everywhere, so it gets like a categorical distinction as like a phenomenon that we can point to. We can say, look, there's that thing, that pattern, that morality, we see that. But we can also do phenomenology with like very basic things. Like, morality is a very complex, subject, but you can do it with like, I got this speaker here, this speaker exists, I see it, I can touch it, I can turn it on, I can interact with it. It has a phenomenon, essentially, that has lots of different modes of expression, and I can look at those individually, or I can look at the unit as a whole. And so phenomenology is simply just taking, in a nutshell, it's simply just taking the raw data of experience, the raw data of experience, and doing your best to describe it as it presents itself without interpreting that description. That's really important. You don't want to interpret the description. You want to just keep it at a very like most basic description possible. I'm trying to think if I could give you an example to show that distinction, because like maybe if we take the figure of Jesus, for example. Jesus, like, he's a historical person. He said a bunch of controversial things. He died. There is reports of his resurrection. There's a whole religious structure that rises out of his life, called Christianity. And you can look at that as a phenomenon without deciding whether it's true or not. That's not necessarily important. You just want to look at the features of the dynamic, and you can analyze it that way. You can get into the weeds of it without bringing in your own like bias, your own, oh, I believe this is true, or I want this to be true. I just want to look at it as it is. Let's just look at the facts, basically. And so the basic brute facts with basic language, so you're not smuggling in value claims on the data itself. Okay, so that's phenomenology in a nutshell. So if I put, let's see, what would we put under here? Ontology is like the nature of the existence. So the nature of existence, of what things exist, like a chair in my mind versus a chair here. They have two different types of nature, because one's physical and one's conceptual. And then phenomenology is, I can think of the concept of chairs, like that's a phenomenon. And so phenomenology is not necessarily the nature of existence, but rather the what of existence. The what of existence. So the what of existence, we have the nature of existence, and then, so then another branch of philosophy, and I'm going to bring this together into one dynamic, essentially, in a moment. So just bear with me for a second. Okay, so then the last, or the other one that I wanted to bring up was epistemology. And so epistemology is another branch of philosophy, and I think epistemology is essentially, I'm not sure how people in the academy define it per se. Like, I don't know exactly what they would say, but I just want to give my understanding of it. So epistemology is like the process that you go through to determine what you're willing to believe or commit to. So epistemology is more like a method in a sense, because epistemology is dealing with the actual logic and the content of claims being made, the actual arguments. It's where the rubber meets the road, let's say, in philosophy. And so because you want to be able to nail down definitions, you want to be able to nail down dynamics and relationships and be as clear as possible with your language, so you're not obfuscating like and importing, basically ontology into the phenomenology without an epistemological justification. Okay, so you kind of see how the mechanisms work in here. So epistemology is something like describing like the how it exists. So by what semantic linguistic description can we justify the existence, the ontological nature of the thing based upon the phenomenological data? So if you think about it like this, phenomenology is data. Ontology is what you commit to. And I'm just going to put embody, because if you believe something, you live it. And if you live something, even if you don't believe it, you kind of do believe it because you're living it, so you can't really have it both ways. And then epistemology is basically like your, maybe like your CPU or your mathematical equations for how you're going to compute data. So we'll say this is epistemology. Oh, that's a really bad M. Epistemology is, I'll just call this the math of language. Within and math of language, maybe it's a little cheeky, but like this is where logic is found too, is in epistemology. So, you have, there is like logical rules, just like mathematical rules, that kind of govern how we use language. Now, I don't necessarily, I think those rules are worth investigating and looking into on their own, and I would like to do that later on, down the road. But right now, I just want to give my general framework for how I interact with, religions or philosophies or ideologies, and so forth. And so this is kind of the dynamic. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet, so I think that if you put these three together, epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology, you get something, I would say that this actually is technically what metaphysics really is, like in a way. So I'm going to just put metaphysics down here. And metaphysics is what I'm particularly interested in. Well, actually, I'm interested in all of it because it's all, from the way that I see it, it's all metaphysics, because ultimately what you commit and embody to is like how you live your life, your physical, material substrate, your body, your mind, like your brain, all that stuff is affected by what you believe. So like that's important. And so like that's like metaphysical in a way. It's in the same, like, you can't point to, ideologies unless they're resident within a person, or you can't point to religions, well, we won't get into that. So, okay, so now, here is, the metaphysics of it. I think this is like the metaphysical mechanism or dynamic, let's say. And then tied together with this is, okay, we're going to start over. I think we're going to start over. Maybe, no, let's not start over. Let's just do it. This is hard to do because, I'm scared to post on YouTube. It's like spooky. So, but hey, we're out here. So, okay, so now so if we think, let's go back. Okay, so the way humans think about things, we observe data, what it's in our culture, our families, we hear things, we see things. We observe data. we reason within ourselves about said data, and then we make commitments about what we're willing to believe. Like, I believe in God, or I don't believe in God, or I believe in Muhammad, or I don't believe in Muhammad, or, I believe in being a good person, or, I believe in predestination, or I believe in free will, or I don't believe in freedom. I believe humans are, animals, like whatever you believe, you obviously have a reason for that belief, and you've committed to that. You live your life that way. And so I'm very interested in this over here, this epistemol. Let me get up here. So I'm very interested in, where are we looking? Yeah, this. Yeah, the epistemology of, I hope that's not backwards for you guys. Can you read that? Oh my gosh. If it's backwards, I'm so sorry. It's probably backwards. Oh gosh. Can I read it on here? It looks backwards to me. Okay, maybe I can flip the video. That's probably a thing. Okay, so I'm really interested in epistemology because how you decide what exists is like everything in a sense. Like, that's like what, like when it comes to the most important questions in life, your methodology about how you arrived at that conclusion is worth looking into. And is your epistemological process sharp? Is there clarity there? Do you have the right data? Because sometimes people just don't know things, like for example, for a while, like people thought, the Bible, for example, they're like, oh, the Bible's been translated and all this stuff, and it's like the telephone game. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And then it's like, well, that narrative is not necessarily true. Of course, the Bible's been tampered with and there's issues with it. But by and large, as a collection of religious text, it's, for the most part, pretty verifiable and accurate, And so that's an important piece of data. You should at least be able to trust the data for the most part. And you can, with the Bible. And so, but that doesn't mean everything in the Bible, is trustworthy. So, but it means like you should have that type of, let's say, nobility to go look for the truth, and figure out like what's going on. So, okay. Okay, I think I am going to start over. Okay.